So, one question I want to ask is, can anybody figure out how these are connected? So how is the Lord, the Word, and the spiritual world connected? There's more than one right answer. How is the Lord connected to the Word?
Is the Lord.
The Lord is the Word. That's a pretty solid connection. So talking about the Lord, obviously we're also talking about the Word. So the more we learn about the Word, the more we learn about the Lord. The more we learn about the Lord, the more it directs us to the Word. So that's a pretty seamless 1-2. But what about the spiritual world? Why do we go to the spiritual world after the Word? What does the spiritual world have to do with the Word? What does it have to do with the Lord? Yeah, there's more than one answer for this question.
I don't say continuation, but what is it? I guess the word kind of gets to spiritual world, well, the right place in the spiritual world.
Okay, the
Yeah.
Word leads you.
The grand man is in the spiritual world, or is the spiritual world? It's heaven, right? Which is
Yeah.
oh, spiritual world, but
Okay, so I want to start with talking about seeing the doctrine as one. If all of these ideas that we talk about in the heavenly doctrine and in the Word are just totally unconnected and random, it's not actually a doctrine, it's just truth. That's actually the difference between truth and doctrine. Truth is a singular thing. You boil it down to something small. It's the building block, it's the stone. But doctrine is when you put a bunch of stones together to form a wall or a building. That's doctrine. You have to use multiple truths to build something useful. A rock in and of itself is valid. But we're talking about the heavenly doctrine. It's a whole series of truths put in a useful pattern. So if we're not seeing them connected to each other, they're just random rocks in the ground. But by taking them out, you can start to use them to build valuable things like walls and roofs and rooms. So seeing the doctrine as interconnected is really important, which is why we're going through these 5 key doctrines, because they really do interconnect. It's not random. It's once we get into it, they're really connected. So the Lord is the Word. That's point 1. That's why we started with the Lord. That's why we went to the Word. Super clear teaching on that one. How does the Word relate to the spiritual world? The Word communicates with heaven. We had that whole slide where we were going on and on about when you read the Word, that literal sentence, it brings angels near. And where are they? They're in the spiritual world. They're up in the spiritual world, in heaven, and it's bringing them closer. So reading the Word is very connected to the spiritual world. But how is the Lord connected to the spiritual world? Because it's not just a sequential list of things that are connected. Well, A is related to B, and B is related to C, but C is also related to A. It's not sequential, it is consecutive, simultaneous. So how is the Lord connected to the spiritual world? Why would we be talking about those 2 different doctrines together?
His principles govern the spiritual world.
Yeah. The Lord's principles, his providence, that that governs the spiritual world. So that's a good connection. How else is the Lord connected to the spiritual?
I mean, he lives there.
He lives there. Yup. I might jump off of that and say, well, not just lives there, he's the center of it. Like literally the center. All of heaven emanates from him. The Lord as the spiritual sun is the center of heaven, and everything radiates out from that. So what does the Lord have to do with the spiritual world? He's the center of it. You don't have a spiritual world if the Lord isn't there. And we already talked about how the word is connected. So, this is a most universal truth, that the Lord is the Son of heaven, and that from this sun is all the light in the other light. It's a universal truth. I don't know about you, but I grew up hearing a lot about the spiritual sun, so the Son of heaven. And the older I get, the more I'm convinced that it's really, really important. And yet, high school Calvin, college Calvin, and even theological school Calvin still didn't really appreciate. Post-theological school Calvinists starting to appreciate the importance of the Lord as the spiritual sun, as an anchor point for the whole spiritual world concept. But it's supposed to be this big truth, this big idea of seeing the Lord as a sun in the center of heaven, and all life starts in the spiritual world and flows out from that. Doesn't start in the natural world and work its way up. Starts in the spiritual and goes down. That's a universal truth. Seeing the doctrine as one continued, the internal sense exists chiefly for the angels, to the end that by means of the word, communication may exist between heaven and man. And again, this picture we have the doyaskin, which is a fake word. Thank you, Google AI images. But anyway, the idea of reading the word, bringing the angels closer, that's connecting heaven and earth. And that, in fact, Siegfried, if you could move, that, in fact, is the point. The internal sense of the word is mostly about the angels. It's for them. But when we read the literal sense, it brings the two closer, which is why there's a literal and internal, to bring those two seemingly different things closer into harmony. We're seeing the doctrine as one. So now that's the peripherals, that's how they connect together. Now let's actually dig into the spiritual world specifically. So if you had to pick one place in all of the heavenly doctrine to learn about the spiritual world, what book would you pick? I would pick Heaven and Hell too. Yes, I think that's a pretty solid bet. If you want to learn about the spiritual world, it is the most collected and collated place of teachings on the spiritual world, all in one convenient place. And in fact, that's actually what we're going to use to talk about the spiritual world, is we're just going to go through the table of contents. My original version of this presentation included going through the entirety of the table of contents, and I gave it just a quick practice run, and it took 2.5 hours. So I decided that we will not go through the entirety of the table of contents. There's actually just too much to talk about, but that's a good thing. It's nice that we can't cover all of the spiritual world in one class. There's so much more to it. But we're just going to hit the first half, which is all about heaven. So, heaven and hell, lots of different covers and copies, but we're going to be sticking with gritty green because I like green. All right, so if you were to look at the table of contents, it looks like this. I don't really expect you to be able to read it. If you can, great. I will try and pull out the titles. But if we're looking on the left-hand side in the Roman numerals, those are the chapters of heaven and hell. In the center, you have the title of the chapter, and then on the left, you have the paragraph numbers associated with it. So, chapter 1, the God of heaven is the Lord. 2, the divine of the Lord makes heaven. 3, in heaven, the divine of the Lord is love to him and charity toward the neighbor. So if we're looking at these three, the first three, I would say that's a pretty strong case for the connection of the spiritual world to the Lord. The first three chapters are all about that. So how does heaven and hell start? Same way we started our class. The Lord is the center. The Lord is the start. Who's the God of heaven? The Lord. Now, to any new church person, that might be obvious. Well, duh. This is also in the context of other Christians. They might not associate Jesus Christ as the God of heaven. They might have that idea of the Trinity wrapped up in there. So in terms of new church doctrine, it is making a distinct point that if you wanted to know who the God of heaven is it the Father, is it the Holy Spirit, or is it Jesus Christ? When the heavenly doctrine uses Lord, it's talking about the Lord God, Jesus Christ. So it's falling squarely on Jesus Christ. That's the one only God of heaven. And, if you had read the previous books on Arcane Celestia or New Jerusalem and its heavenly doctrine, if you got through those books, by the time you were reading Heaven and Hell in sequence, that would be a pretty clear point. So I just point that out. It, again, is making a broad point. Jesus Christ, center of heaven. So then it goes to the layout. It says heaven is divided into two kingdoms, and there are three heavens. So those are the next two chapters. So I've drawn on a diagram. I drew this in theological school, and I'm not satisfied with it. But there are three heavens and two kingdoms, and I have long tried to visualize this. So I'm pretty comfortable with the idea of celestial being at the top, spiritual being in the middle, and natural being on the bottom. And that would fit with the three heavens. But then how do you take into account the two kingdoms? The side stack, like I've thrown up here. Got my color coding in green for the natural. You've got the celestial kingdom, the spiritual kingdom, the celestial heaven, the spiritual heaven, and then the celestial natural, spiritual natural, which kind of looks like four heavens. I'm not the first person to try and draw this. But having looked at other people's explanations, I'm still not satisfied. Nor am I satisfied with my own drawing of it.
So what are the two kingdoms?
There's a chapter in Heaven and Hell on it.
Okay.
So it says there's a celestial kingdom and a spiritual kingdom. There's two kingdoms. There are three heavens. So this is one where I don't know quite how to picture it. There is a whole wealth of teachings in the doctrine about some people are of a spiritual genius, some are of a celestial. And so you have these different dispositions. Are you more celestial, more spiritual? But there's no natural kingdom.
I mean, is it like
Is it-
celestial?
Sorry, is it like, I'm just thinking heaven sounds more geographical and kingdom sounds more like political or governing? Like, does it have to do with sort of the, I don't know, time and space in heaven obviously is not the same as here, but is that part of the difference or no?
I think so. And I try. I'm just so visual. I want to map it, and maybe like you say, geographical or layout of heaven. Maybe the kingdoms don't really belong in the geography of heaven, so to speak. Maybe that's more on the political realm, political borders rather than geographic. I don't know.
It's making me think of like celestial, maybe more like on the love side of things, and spiritual's more on the truth side. So that's a pair, like there's not a third thing.
It's a use.
But like, so
But-
if those two though are coming down through the three levels, is that sort of, which, sort of what you.
Right. But then you get teachings about the celestial heaven being love to the Lord, and the spiritual heaven being in charity toward the neighbor. And the spiritual angels are the ones who come to the Lord through truth, whereas the celestial angels come to the Lord through love. And so the graphing of the celestial and spiritual kingdoms with the heavens still confuses. But perhaps that's the price we pay for trying to visualize what is said to not be in time or space. And I'm so spatially trying to graph this and just doesn't quite work.
I keep thinking back to what the Lord tells us, the kingdom of heaven doesn't come with observation, it's within you. So is it like the heavens is actual in our minds of places, but then our state is the kingdoms. Makes sense or not either.
Yeah, 'cause state is sure out of time and space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
oh, Byron?
I just, or maybe this will address it. I noticed in Divine Love and Wisdom, he has a number that he talks both about the 3 degrees that the angels are in, celestial, spiritual, and natural. And in the following paragraphs, he talks about the 2 kingdoms. And so they're right there with each other. And it's trying to read it to see if it made it clear the relationship between these two is almost like is a discrete degrees versus continuous degrees or something like that, but
Okay.
it-
Well, that was unfortunate. I dropped my mouse and it landed perfectly where apparently I was hovering the leave button the whole time. And so when my mouse dropped, it exited the call. Anyway, I apologize.
Do you need it? Do you need Byron to repeat what he said or?
That would be great.
well, and maybe what I could do too, in case someone, I'll put it in the chat just if it helps, because when I read that, you know, like I said, it's all kind of there encapsulated in one number, but it doesn't, the distinction still doesn't jump out at you. And, you know, maybe someone smarter than me could glean what that distinction is. anyway.
Is that in heaven and hell or else?
Divine love and wisdom.
Thought it sounded kind of DLW-like.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the very next number in 233 is about why the Lord came on earth as a person, and how. So this is like setting up the context of the Lord coming in the natural, because it needs to complete the sequence of celestial, spiritual, and natural. Are you guys seeing my PowerPoint, or are we?
Yeah.
Yes.
My red line around it has disappeared. Okay. Okay. So another way the doctrine tries to graph this, or at least we try to graph it, is in sequential or successive order. And what I like about this picture is that in one sense, you see the heavens stacked on top of each other, but in another sense, you see that the celestial is central to the other heavens. It's in the center of them, and you get this radiating out from it. And so I like the bullseye approach of thinking of heaven as, well, if the Lord is the center of heaven, so if you imagine the very, very pinpoint of that is the Lord is the spiritual Son, and what's going to make you happiest is to be closest to him. Well, there's a reason it says celestial angels are the happiest. They're the closest to the Lord. They're in that inner belt. And as you understand and follow the Lord a little less, even if you're still a good person, as you move further out, you're experiencing less of the Lord's love, experiencing less happiness as a result, but still good. And so just picturing the boundaries of this bullseye, you want to hit the middle. You want to be close to the Lord, and that's going to make you happy. And that point comes across strong as you're working your way through the book. Okay. So other ways to, if we're talking about the layout of heaven, celestial, spiritual, natural, then in the middle you have the world of spirits, and then you have the highest hell, the satanic hell, and the diabolical hell. Fun fact, the highest hell is never named. There's no point in the doctrine where it names it. So Bruce Rogers back in the day called it the Child's Hall hell. For any of those who stayed in the Child's Hall dorm, he started that, and then Scott Frazier, when he took over.
Freshman college boys dorm, right?
Yes, the freshman college boys dorm at Burnett. Scott Frazier has carried on the tradition of referring to the highest hell as the Child's Hall hell. You got to call it something, because it's not even called the highest hell. It talks about these three hells, and the diabolic and the satanic and that last other hell and the other hell. So that's one way to picture the spiritual world. Those are your main categories, and the highest, closest to the Lord, the bottom, the furthest away. But the world of spirits it's called in the middle, but in some ways it's not really the middle. It's not like the people in the world of spirits are less happy. The thing about the world of spirits is there are people who are destined for the spiritual heaven, who by love and disposition are close to the Lord, but they haven't settled on a permanent home yet. And so that waiting period in the middle of the world of spirits, you can put it right smack in the middle, number 4 of 7, but it can vary widely. You could be in the world of spirits and have not yet made up your mind to go to the diabolic hell. But that doesn't mean you're currently happier than the people in the highest. The world of spirits is tricky. Here's a fun question. True or false? Are you in the world of spirits now?
Say no.
Me too.
I'm gonna go with yes, because you're asking the question.
Arthur deduction, that's right. Yes, we are in the world of spirits right now. Do you know what part of you is in the world of spirits right now? No, not your soul. To a degree, more technically, your mind. I think he said it first.
I was thinking it.
So your mind is in the world of spirits right now, because we have not yet made up our mind on where we're going. We are in the world of spirits right now, associating with other spirits. As we have interactions with people on a daily basis, our mind up in the world of spirits is doing its thing. It's bumping into spirits in the world of spirits. As you make good or bad decisions, as you think ill of your neighbor or think well of them, those things are affecting what's going on up there. Or rather, it's going the other way. What you're doing in your mind is trickling down into how you live your life in the natural world. So what I like about this is picturing you are just on a journey trying to find your spiritual home. And so while your mind is presently in the world of spirits, you are wandering around to different societies of spirits, trying to find somewhere where you can settle down and live to eternity. And as you're wandering through the world of spirits, you are bumping into people who are heavenly, hellish, and making associations. Just like we are here. We're trying to carve out a slice of heaven on earth. That's hopefully everybody's goal. And yeah, it is going on in the spiritual world. The world of spirits is that proving ground. You're not set in stone. You can move around and visit other places, see what fits. And sometimes you figure out exactly what you want and you don't move much. You settle down, and the only thing separating you from your spiritual home is loss of natural life. But you can have found your spiritual society well on earth. And the last thing is just natural body passing away. That'll mean you have less time in the world of spirits when you die. Or you might still have a lot to sort out. But I get the impression that it's kind of nice to move quickly through the world of spirits. If you picture the world of spirits like a DMV, it's
Oh, no.
you don't want to. You can spend an eternity there, but you really don't want to. Okay. So, the grand man. This was referenced earlier. This is another portion of the book, and it's actually a huge part of the Arcana. A lot of the chapters of Heaven and Hell are simply extracted from the Arcana interchapter material. Some other time, we'll talk more about it, but you just have to trust me that most of the content of Heaven and Hell comes directly out of the Arcana, and the Grand Man section is significantly longer in the Arcana and gets trimmed down drastically to fit in Heaven and Hell. But there's a lot to say about it, and we're not going to say much. But heaven consists of innumerable societies. Each society is a heaven in smaller form, and each angel in the smallest form. These are chapters of Heaven and Hell. And all heaven in the aggregate reflects a single man. Each society in heaven reflects a single man. And there's a lot more. So, the Grand Man. This is heaven. Just a big person. There's littler people inside of the biggest person, and then there's even littler people inside of the medium size. The Doctrine talks a lot about the Lord seeing all of heaven as one person. And when we think about these different societies in the world of spirits, they've got their different things they're doing, but they're all performing a function for the universe. The Lord sees it all in perfect harmony, that each one of them is doing something. So in the Doctrine of the Grand Man, it talks, there are hair spirits, there are finger spirits, kidney spirits, eye spirits, heart and lung spirits. There's all these different spirits that their society in heaven is performing a specific function. For me, I kind of think I'm going to end up as like a toenail spirit somehow. But I put it to you that if you've ever seen someone or personally know that feeling of they just don't have enough fingernail or toenail, it makes me squeamish, super squeamish to think about a lack of toenails or fingernails. It's a really important job. It's not as glamorous as the heart or lungs, but boy, do you need toenail spirits. And so where we might be inclined to say, well, it's the heart or bust, the Lord sees each and every use of these societies as one connected thing working in harmony for the greatest good of him. So we could say a lot more about the Grand Man, but don't set your eyes on being a heart spirit if really you're a toenail. Time and space. Boy, oh boy, there's a lot here. Correspondences, the sun of heaven, light and heat, the four quarters, changes of state, time, and appearances. So we could go on and on and on about this, and we're not going to. But I want to spend some time on the four quarters. So here we have the four cardinal directions: north, east, south, and west. All right, so I flashed it before your eyes. Hopefully you were paying attention. I don't know how well you can see it on the camera, but boy, oh boy, my lights in my house are strobing. So if people are distracted, then it's distracting. Anyway, so you've got the 4 cardinal directions. Which is the best direction? Where should you want to live? In the east. That's why I moved to the Midwest. Where is the second best location? Yes. So the southeast, therefore, Boynton Beach, Florida is the best place to live for a church society. In the United States. I guess Brisbane's doing pretty well in Australia. That's okay. So we also have west and north. So which is the next best? Final answer?
West.
All right. Let's go back through our bars here. So what's the red bar?
Love.
Yes. What's the blue bar? Yes. Okay, so if north and south are on wisdom and east and west are on love, why is west not the next best after east? Because we said south is second best. So if east is the best, then south, why isn't it west? Come on, we've got love, then wisdom, then back to love, or back to wisdom. What's going on here?
The red one's thicker. Or is that just the angle?
That's just the angle. Those are copy and pasted.
It looks like the blue one's about half the size of the red one from here.
Okay, so some things to keep in mind. In the east, we have the sunrise. In the north, it is cold. The south, it's warm. And in the west, we enjoy the sunset. Another way to think about it, you've got sunrise in the east, sunset in the west. It's cold in the north and warm in the south. Slides got out of order. Another way to think about it, you've got cold in the north, warm in the south. In the east, it's getting bright. The light is increasing. Whereas in the west, it is getting dark.
I'd rather be cold than dark.
Rather cold than dark. Try again.
Oh no, I hate falsity. But I hate evil.
Okay. So, in the east, we have love. And in the west, we have evil. In the north, there is falsity, but in the south, there is wisdom. So I put it to you again, which is, can you order them 1 through 4, best to worst? So we already got through the first 2, so it is east, south, but how do you arrange those last 2?
You're in
North,
completely through yet.
I was gonna say north would be next, and then evil, because that's falsity confirmed in one's life. And it's the farthest away from love. Maybe, maybe.
Yep. So it doesn't work its way perfectly around the compass. It would kind of be nice if you just started at the east and moved your way clockwise all the way around. But that's not how it works. You're right. Evil confirmed as opposed to falsity. The doctrine distinguishes between falsity from evil or evil from falsity. And for a long time, those two things were very confused in my mind. Siegfried, can you step out of the way of the projector, buddy? Which is worse? Evil from falsity or falsity from evil? This will help you reading the Doctrine, I promise, because those terms come up, and if it's all just gibberish, as it was for most of my life until last year, when finally it clicked the difference. Evil from falsity are the evil things that you do because you believe something false. Right? It is evil derived from falsity. You think something false, which leads you to do something evil. Whereas falsity from evil is so bad because you love something evil. You love doing something evil, and so you make up falsifications for why you should stay in that evil. And once you get to that point, it's really hard to get out. Because in the prior instance, you were just confused. You believed something false and it led you to do something evil. But in the latter, you already love what's evil, and now you're going through the mental gymnastics of justifying it. Once you're there, it's really hard to turn it around, because it wasn't that you didn't have the truth, it's that in spite of it, you made up a falsity to justify your love. So that's why it's east, south, north, west, best to worst, directions of heaven. Okay. Good, evil, true, false. This is another really useful way to think of, to kind of graph what's going on when you encounter ideas in the doctrine. There are two axes, the east-west, north-south. The good-evil axis and the true-false axis. So let's try something like wisdom. Which axis does that go on? Yeah, the true-false axis. How about charity? East-west. How about faith? Faith is north-south. So I just throw that to you. Try and graph different terms you bump into. The doctrine talks in terms of, it pertains to the truth side of things. It pertains to the good side of things. It's what's important about the axes is that you can see the opposite if you go far. So from charity, you can go all the way to the other end. Not a falsity, but a lack of goodwill. And that's a continuous thread that goes out the other way. But enough of that. Other ideas that come up in heaven and hell is government and worship. And these are two topics I hold quite dear. All right, so government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable. Thomas Paine. So, zoom. So, government. This is a rather lengthy passage from Heaven and Hell. And at this point in the book, we're a little under halfway. So, it says, as heaven is divided into societies, and the larger societies consist of some hundreds or thousands of angels, and all within a society, though in like good, are not enlightened wisdom. It must needs follow that governments exist there, since order must be observed and all things of order must be guarded. But the governments in the heavens differ. They are of one sort in societies that constitute the Lord's celestial kingdom, and of another sort in the societies that constitute his spiritual kingdom. They differ also in accordance with the functions of several societies. Okay, so as something of a libertarian, I find these teachings particularly challenging. I often find myself in the place of wanting to say that no government is good government. But from doctrine, I know that that's not true. So whatever my inclinations are, it's not no government. Good government is what we're supposed to have. So regardless of what you think of politics, we should have government. And the libertarian part of me just died inside. But it's okay, because I'm told that there is government in heaven. And if there's government in heaven and earth is supposed to, in its best form, resemble heaven, we should be trying as best we can to emulate heaven on earth. So there needs to be government. So we're told in the section on government that governors do not domineer or dictate, but they minister and serve. They put the good of society and of the neighbor in the first place, and their own good last. Nevertheless, the rulers have honor and glory. They dwell in the midst of the society in higher position than the rest. So another idea, they are both ministers and servants, but they're also honored, respect, a higher position. So government officials should both be compensated, given positions higher. They should have glory and honor. We should respect them. And yet, on their part, they need to put the good of everybody else ahead of them. If they're putting their own good ahead of the constituents which they serve, that's not a good government. Which I'm pretty sure most people would agree on. And I think that would probably work across the board, regardless of political affiliation. That, of course, we want someone who serves the people, puts the good of the people above his own, and the latter part might be more of a stretch. But hopefully, if our officials are serving well, we give them honor and glory, and we have no problem that they dwell in nice houses in higher position than the rest, in the midst of the society. And that's all okay. They're government officials. They don't have to be treated like scum. Again, the libertarian part of me dying, but it's okay. That part needs to die. So I've seen this ad a couple of times, but the government's job is to serve, not control. I think that certainly captures the first part of the passage. Not to domineer or dictate, but minister and serve. Speaking of ads I've seen, government protecting and serving the out of you. Anyway, I get quite a kick out of this. So the point is, government is supposed to minister and serve, and you are supposed to respect them. And when both of those things are happening, order is preserved, society runs better, and as an individual, if you don't spend so much of your time being angry or even angsty with the government, you're just going to be a lot happier. Which brings us to worship. Government, right to worship. And if you have read NJHD, New Jerusalem and its Heavenly Doctrine, similarly, worship and government go hand in hand. The very last chapter of New Jerusalem and its Heavenly Doctrine is on the two different types of government: civil government and ecclesiastical, or church government. So these ideas of government keep going back and forth, and right off of government, it jumps into worship, which, again, if you've read NJHD, that seems to be how the doctrine tends to talk about these things. Government, worship, church, state. So it says that divine worship in the heavens is not unlike external divine worship on earth. But in internals, it is different. In the heavens, as on the earth, there are doctrines, preachings, and church edifices. Hi. So this one's really interesting to me because divine worship in heaven is not unlike in external the divine worship on earth. So if you want to know what worship looks like in heaven, go to church. It just said you want a picture of it. Worship in heaven looks pretty similar, not unlike how it does on earth. So they go to church buildings, they pray, they hear sermons, they read from the Word. Those are all things that happen in heaven. So I've heard a number of complaints about, well, but is that really the most important thing? And if you're going to have to do it to eternity in heaven, getting in the habit now is to your benefit. So that's all I'll say about worship. All right, so that concludes the in-depth, such as it was, portion of what we got through. So if we were to look at the table of contents here, there are 2.5 pages or so of table of contents. We finished page 1. So we didn't even finish the section on heaven. We ended with worship. And then you have another huge series of teachings on heaven. Then the world of spirits, and then finally hell. So we're going to rapid fire through a couple of these key ideas. The heathen. I don't know about you, but if you've ever skimmed through and you see a term like the heathen, it catches my eye. I have to stop and read it. But it's actually a really lovely chapter on, hey, there are people who are not inside the church. What's the deal with them in heaven? And it goes through and it lays out, well, there's different types of people outside the church. Those by choice, those by ignorance, and there's a world of difference between them. So that's a huge idea. It's a much more, I would say it's a much more merciful idea of non-baptized Gentile people. When the doctrine talks about the heathen, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Just because you're not part of the church, baptized, proper, born and raised, it consistently makes the point that Christians can often be worse than Gentiles because they didn't know any better. We do, and we're still doing terrible things. So heathen come off much better in the doctrine than other Christian sects. Children in heaven. Speaking of other Christian sects, if you believe that children who die go to heaven, you must be New Church. Because this is a curious New Church teaching where most other Christian faiths insist that you must be baptized. And so children who die in infancy, not going to heaven. Another great teaching for the New Church. And I know a number of people who, I know at least 3 people who no longer call themselves Christian because how could a loving God send children to hell? Just because they were baptized. And I don't believe that he does. So anyway, rich and poor, that's another one. You might think that it's bad to be rich, or you might think that it's good to be poor. Both of those are dumb ideas. There's no problem with being rich, and there's no bonus points for being poor. If we talk about money less, we'll all probably be happy. Marriage, another great idea. Talks about how blissful and happy things are. It's just a fraction of what comes later, but the idea that the central way the Lord blesses people with happiness is through the marriage of a man and a woman. And that in heaven, that's where all the delight in conjugal love, you get all the blessings, delight, felicity, joy, and happiness is given through conjugal love. Really important idea. Employment. You are not playing harps on a cloud. You actually have to get a job in heaven. So if you have trouble now, figure it out, because you're going to need to figure it out to eternity. And joy. Heavenly joy and happiness. What a nice thought. So, world of spirits. Resuscitation. If you've ever been to a new church memorial service, much of the readings are usually derived from these like 3 or 4 chapters on resuscitation. What's it like to wake up after you die? It's nice to have a whole chapter walking through the timeline of your process. Another important idea we learn in the world of spirits is as the tree falls, so it lies. The idea that by the time you get to the world of spirits, you don't change. You've spent your life developing your loves and picking what it is you like. So if you're holding off of, well, I really want to go to heaven, and when I get to the world of spirits, I'll cram really hard right at the end to test my way into heaven, the Lord will actually let you go to heaven. The problem is you won't want to stay there. If you spent your entire life trying to cheat and swindle people, and you get to the world of spirits and they say heaven or hell, and you say heaven, and you make your way up to heaven and try lying, cheating, and swindling people, and then they kick you out because you're not allowed to do that there, and you try and stay but not cheat and swindle, that's going to make you sad. You're not going to want to be there. So the Lord doesn't kick you out of heaven, but you take with you how you live. As the tree falls, so it lies. There's no, after enough time, the statute of limitations on my evils is worn out. Now I'm upgrading to the next heaven. More on waking up after death. Another key idea, no mercy apart from needs. So just like we take with us everything from the world, the Lord does not simply send everyone to heaven without a life according to it. And in part, we learn in this chapter, it's about our freedom. It's about us and our happiness. And if the Lord forced us to go to heaven, despite having lived our entire natural life, hating the things of heaven and loving the things of hell, that would make us miserable to eternity. So he's not going to do that. So misconceptions about mercy. But then the last section is it's actually not that difficult, which I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there is a gospel passage that says there are 2 paths, the broad way and the narrow way. And there are many who find the broad way and few who find that narrow way. So when you talk about, okay, is it easy or difficult to get to heaven? Well, Heavenly Doctrine says it's not as difficult as people think. one of the key ideas is that even though we do bad things, if every time a bad thought comes into your head, you acknowledge that it's not me. That bad thought is not me. That's from hell. That's one of the key ideas for making it to heaven, is learning to identify the things that are from hell and just say that doesn't have to be part of it. Which is a relieving idea, because there are all sorts of terrible things that bubble into my head. And if I condemned myself, if I felt guilty for every bad thing that I thought, it's not so much that bad things bubble into our head, it's what we do with them. If every time we say, that's not me anymore, you're on the right track. And then lastly, hell. It's all about hell. And I'm not going to get into that in particular. Not because I don't like talking about hell. I love talking about hell. But we've exceeded time, I think. So that is all I have on that.